Melbourne. But now, we're beginning to turn, and A is for and it's also for Adelaide, that you see on the mid-south shore of Australia. And we keep going and we point, and P is for point. It's also for please. It's also for Perth. We point to the other side, and there we find the big city of the West Coast, Perth. Okay. Well, that phrase, bulls surely can moo, please, pretty silly. But if you remember it, you ought to be able to remember those 6 Australian cities and get them right on the map quiz. Notice I didn't tell you the population of any of those cities. I didn't explain the history of any of those cities. That's not the point of the map quiz. The map quiz is to know where those cities are. And I think this little memory device helps you remember where they are. You're going to do one map quiz tip sometime in the semester. Maybe you'll have a jingle, an acronym, something silly, something logical, something different to help us remember where the place is. Okay. All right, and next I have a small homework assignment for you that's due on Thursday. And for that, I want you to write one paragraph saying what you think is the world's most isolated city. What is the world's most isolated city? Now, to do that, you will need to define most isolated. There could be, well, a few at least reasonable ways of defining that. And probably you should define city. Is a settlement of 1,000 people a city? I would say no, no way, it's a village. Is a settlement of 10,000 people a city? I would say it's a town. Is a settlement of 1 million people a city? I would say obviously. So where is it? How would you define a city? All right, based on those definitions, say what you think is the world's most isolated city. Now, since you get to define those terms, you might well define them differently than someone else in this class. So you might come up with a different answer. That's fine. There can be indeed several good possible answers to this question. Do not make this a huge project. It is one paragraph. Have it completed before class and submit it on Blackboard sometime before class on Thursday. There is a slot now open on Blackboard for the most isolated city. Okay. All right. Now, a few minutes today to start on our new region and our first region, and it is the Pacific Realm, sometimes called Oceania, sometimes called the Pacific world, and certainly dominated in area and population by Australia. So we're going to begin with Australia, and in fact, do quite a bit with Australia. I'm going to highlight 3 things I think you should know about Australia. So here's thing number 1. Historically, Australia was an isolated place, so its exploration and settlement came late. And this is going to fit well with my mini theme for the whole Pacific realm. My mini theme is isolation. And here I'm arguing that isolation caused exploration and settlement to come late. Historically, Australia was an isolated place, so its exploration and settlement came late. Now, as we look at Australia and its location, it even kind of infers, yeah, isolation. Now, of course, we want to recall that when we look at a world map, we could look at a map from any particular perspective, right? And what you're seeing here is, again, the traditional kind of thing with Europe and United States near the top, but it doesn't have to be. So we want to keep that bias in mind. Even so, you get the feeling like Australia is isolated. It certainly is far from the United States, all the way across the Pacific Ocean and in the other side of the equator. From South America, you still have to go all the way across the Pacific Ocean. From Africa, southern side, you'd have to go all the way across the Indian Ocean. From North Africa, it's all the way around. Europe clearly is very far from Australia. The close places to Australia are in Asia, but to get there by water, you have to go through lots of islands of what is now Indonesia. So the closest places to Australia had barriers to reaching Australia. All right, I have another chat question for you. Put your answer in the chat. Who got there first? A, natives from New Guinea and Indonesia. B, the Chinese. C, the Portuguese. D, the Dutch. E, the British. And as I've said a number of times, maybe now enough times, you don't lose points in the chat. So just give it your best shot. And if you're wrong, hey, you'll find out momentarily, and that will reinforce the correct answer for you. So 10 seconds to put your answer in the chat. Okay, a second chat question. Which of these places of the Pacific world not named for an explorer? This may be especially difficult, but that's okay. Again, just give it your best shot. Is it the Torres Strait, the Bass Strait, Tasmania, Victoria, or the Cook Strait? Not named for an explorer. And also in the chat. Now, true or false? A strait is a narrow passageway of water between two large land masses. True or false? This is a geographic term. It is pronounced strait, but there is no G or H in the word. Well, okay, this one is true. That is the correct definition of our geographic word strait. Who indeed got there first? Well, it was native peoples from nearby. And certainly that makes sense logically. If we're talking about isolation, it would be the nearest folks who got there first. So people sailing across, probably in relatively simple boats or canoes even, from somewhat nearby places. Islands that are now in New Guinea, islands that are now in Indonesia. And first arriving, anthropologists suggest about 50,000 years ago. Now, they did spread out across Australia, but they never got to be in terribly large numbers. We estimate that when Europeans did start to arrive, it was just 300,000 or so of these natives. Not very many. But think about where they were living and when they were living. They were living when there was not advanced technology. They were living in a very dry, rugged land that certainly would not support large populations. Even now with modern technology, not many people live in the interior of Australia. And Australia, for its size, doesn't have that many people. So these people were in some ways simple in terms of what we think of now as advanced civilization, but they were also well skilled for where they lived, which makes sense. they developed wilderness skills to survive in that rugged place. Eventually, though, other peoples do arrive. We do know that the Chinese did arrive in Australia in the 16th century. They didn't go many places. They were on the North Shore, but they did sense, I guess, that there might be something big here. They go back reporting to have seen an Isle of Gold. Well, is it kind of a good-sized island? Seems to be, but they don't have any sense of how large it is because they're just on a few spots on the north side. An oddity is that they harvested a lot of sea slugs from the shorelines because back in China, they would use those to create love potions or aphrodisiacs. Well, okay. We do know now that there were Portuguese explorers there. And I say now because it's an odd story about a secret. At the time, there was quite a bit of competition between Portugal, Spain, Netherlands, Britain, France in exploring and trying to find wealth in different parts of the world. For instance, the Spice Islands that were out there north of Australia, the Spice Islands were, places where you could bring back exotic spices and sell them for great profits in Europe. These countries were having explorers go out, hoping to find riches. So there was competition. So when Portuguese explorers landed on Australia, they decided they thought they'd found something worthwhile, so they better keep it a secret. So especially their neighbors, the Spanish, don't know. Well, apparently they kept the secret too well, and even the Portuguese lost track of it. And it's only about 2 decades ago that we found a map drawn by these Portuguese explorers that shows part of the Australian coastline. They were there, and then, oops, lost track of it. Their rivals, the Spanish, did go out there. And in 1605, a flotilla of ships went out, headed up by Pedro Fernando de Queiroz. And they sailed along. They knew of rumors. They knew of rumors of a big land out there. Nobody had proved it, quite where it was or how big it was, but they knew there seemed to be a rumor. Was it just a myth or was it truth? They wanted to find out. So they sailed out looking, and they sailed, oh my goodness, they sailed right between the island of New Guinea and the land Australia. On that north side of Australia, just north of it, just between that and New Guinea, and missed it. And they sailed farther on, and they did hit an island that is just slightly larger than many of the islands of the Pacific world. There's a lot of very small islands in the Pacific world, and this was a bit bigger. And so Pedro Fernando de Queiroz thought, oh, this must be it. This must be that bigger land. And so he named it, and he named it Australia. He had a connection to the King of Austria, and in some Latin-based languages, austral means south. So he went and smushed those together and made the word Australia and named this place. Well, no, that was not what we now call Australia. That was not this huge land. And eventually the name got shifted over to what we now understand. And this place where he landed is now called Vanuatu. They sailed through this narrow passageway of water between Australia and New Guinea. And Luis Vaz de Torres, captaining one of the other ships, he got his name on the map. So that narrow passageway between Australia and New Zealand is the Torres Strait. One example, there are many in the world of places that got named for explorers. Okay, the Dutch were also out here, and I feel like sometimes we forget about the Dutch. The Dutch, in fact, were great explorers too. The Dutch, in fact, got to North America as well. New York was actually first New Amsterdam, named for the Dutch city, before the British got it from the Dutch. Well, the Dutch were also out exploring in this part of the world. And in fact, on several different voyages, they landed, as you see, on Australia. Sometimes it was just one spot. Zeewolf in 1618 landed in one spot on the west side. Sometimes the voyages, the Gulden Zeepaert in 1627, well, went quite a ways on the southern side of Australia. So when you put all these landings together, it certainly suggests that there's something big here. Now you can't prove it because no one went all the way around. It could be there's a big island here, another island, or a bunch of islands, and they happened to land on several of them. So they wanted to figure this out. They wanted to prove how big it actually is, and yeah, I'm sure to take some financial benefit from that. So back in the Netherlands, the Dutch come from the Netherlands, back in the Netherlands, Anthony van Diemen put together a voyage. He organized it, funded it, and chose Abel Tasman as the captain. In 1642, setting out to go around this whole place to find out how big this place is. So did Tasman go all the way around? Well, I guess technically, yes. But oops, not the way they wanted. So he missed the whole mainland entirely. Now, he did land on that island, the southeastern corner of Australia, that big island, and he named it for the sponsor back in the Netherlands. He named it Van Diemen's Land. Well, that name didn't last either, and it was soon named for Tasman himself, and that is, of course, Tasmania. So a second example of a place named for an explorer. After landing there, they went on and they reached what is New Zealand, and they were the first Europeans to arrive in New Zealand. However, there were already native peoples there too. These native peoples of New Zealand are not related to the native peoples of Australia, entirely different. All right, but Tasman named the place New Zealand. Now, of course, the natives had already named the place too, but he named it as well. Now, when you name a place New something, clearly it means it's referring to another place. So this must be referring to another place, Zeeland. Well, the Netherlands, the name of the country, literally means low lands, nether, low, low lands. And although the Netherlands is a small country, they do have several regions. We have 50 states. Well, they've got several regions as well. The most famous region of Netherlands is Holland. But one of the other regions of the Netherlands is Zeeland. So Tasman named New Zealand for the Dutch province Zeeland back at home. Okay, they sailed on, they hit Tonga and Fiji, There were already natives there as well. And then they zigzagged across and eventually got to a Dutch port, an established city, a Dutch colony, Batavia. That place too has a new name. Well, changed the name a long while ago. That is Jakarta now, the capital city of Indonesia, originally a Dutch colony city. So Tasman didn't really do the job. He didn't get the mainland, and they didn't turn out to know anything more about how big the place is. So they told him to try again. So in 1644, he set off from Batavia, sailed east. You can see the little arrows there. And he does reach there, right at the Torres Strait. He does reach North Australia. And all right, good. He stayed with the coastline for quite a while, but then sailed back to Batavia. So better, yes, he does show this must be a pretty large piece of land, especially when we add to it the other voyages of Dutch exploration. But no, he doesn't do the east side at all. We don't know if there even is an east side that is substantial. We don't know. We have more evidence, but it's still not all the way around. So we still could do better here. All right. Well, then the British come. The British come out here, and famous in the history of British seafarers is this Captain William Dampier. And he comes out with voyages in 1688 and 1699. And this guy was kind of a sophisticated dude, a Renaissance man. He was quite intelligent, and he was into lots of things, even words. Okay, well, it's winter here, so I'm not going to be out barbecuing, but he's the guy who made the word barbecue, put the English word barbecue into use. Yesterday, I did get takeout food from Chipotle, and I did have some guacamole. Well, he's the man who put the word avocado into the English language. All right, so he's this sort of sophisticated dude. And he meets the natives. And they're so different than he is. They don't have cities. They don't have libraries. They don't have fancy clothes. They're so different. And he calls them the miserablest people in the world. Pretty harsh, pretty harsh, but I can sort of see, because he is so sophisticated coming from Britain, probably the most advanced country in the world at the time. And then he sees people who just live in the wilderness. Well, harsh, but it turns out very important. His assessment turns out to be very important. All right, well, we're going to need to follow up on Dampier and another British explorer to see more about this history of exploration and settlement for Australia. But we've run out of time now. So what do you need to do? Well, you need to write up one paragraph for the world's most isolated city and submit that in Blackboard before class on Thursday. You should, of course, keep reading the chapters in the textbook, and you should continue to post in the discussion board. If you have any trouble with that, send me an email. We'll get you going. Probably you should start looking at the list of places for the Pacific Realm map quiz.